On my 70th birthday, I stood shivering in the cold rain outside the restaurant I had patronized for 30 years, while my own daughter told a crowd of strangers I had lost my mind. I was ready to give up, to let the cold seep into my old bones, until a young mechanic with grease under his fingernails stepped close and whispered a secret that froze the blood in my veins. Before I tell you what he said, let me know in the comments where you are watching from. If you have ever been underestimated by the people who should love you most, hit that like button and subscribe, because this story is for you. I adjusted my silk tie in the reflection of the glass doors at the Gilded Oak. Tonight was supposed to be a celebration. 70 years of life, a milestone that demanded a certain level of dignity. I had reserved the table weeks in advance, the same secluded corner booth where my late wife Lillian and I had celebrated our 40th and 50th anniversaries. Even 2 years after her passing, I could still feel the warmth of her hand in mine whenever I sat there. I took a deep breath, inhaling the familiar scent of roasted garlic and rosemary wafting from inside. I felt good. I felt sharp. My back was straight, and my mind was as clear as the architectural blueprints I used to draw for the city skyline. I walked toward the heavy mahogany doors, expecting the warm greeting I always received. I was Harrison Caldwell, after all. I was not just a customer, I was a fixture of this city. Paul, the manager, who had known me since he was a busboy, stepped directly in my path. His face, usually bright with a professional smile, was now a mask of cold indifference. He did not open the door. He blocked it. I stopped, confused. "Good evening, Paul," I said, stepping forward. "I believe my reservation is for 7 o'clock. My family should be arriving any minute." Paul did not move. He crossed his arms over his chest, a gesture of dominance I had never seen him direct at a paying customer, let alone me. "I am sorry, Mr. Caldwell," he said, loud enough for the couple standing behind me to hear. "We cannot seat you tonight." I chuckled, thinking it was some kind of dry humor. A bad joke to start the evening. "Good one, Paul. But really it is staring to drizzle out here." "Let us go inside." Paul did not budge. His eyes were hard. "I am not joking, sir. Your reservation has been canceled, and your credit card was declined for the cancellation fee. Furthermore, we have strict instructions from your family not to serve you alcohol or allow you on the premises unsupervised." My jaw dropped. The humiliation washed over me hotter than the shame. Declined? My credit score was perfect. I had never missed a payment in 50 years. And instructions from my family? Since when did I need a babysitter? "Paul," I said, my voice trembling slightly, not from age but from rising anger. "Do you know who I am? I designed the structural integrity of this building. I have eaten here since before you were born." "Run the card again." "There must be a mistake." "There is no mistake," Paul said, turning his back on me. "Please leave the premises. Mr. Caldwell, or I will have to call security. You are disturbing the other guests." I looked around. People were staring. A young couple whispered behind their hands. An older woman looked at me with deep suspicion, clutching her purse tighter. I felt a sudden wave of dizziness. My reality was tilting. Was I confused? No. I checked my watch. It was 7 o'clock. I was Harrison Caldwell. I was sane. Just then, a sleek black SUV pulled up to the curb, screeching to a halt. My heart leaped. It was them. My daughter Victoria and her husband Gavin. Thank God, I thought. They can clear this up. They can tell Paul he has made a terrible error. The passenger door opened and Victoria stepped out. She looked stunning in a red dress, but her face was twisted in an expression I could not quite read. "Victoria!" I called out, waving my hand, trying to regain my composure. "Thank heavens you are here. Tell Paul this is ridiculous. Tell him I am paying cash if the card is down." Victoria did not look at me with concern or anger. She looked at the crowd gathering in the foyer. She looked at the valet drivers. She looked at the diners watching through the glass. Then she took a deep breath and let out a theatrical sob that echoed in the quiet entryway. "Oh, Dad," she cried, rushing forward but stopping short of actually touching me. "Oh, Dad, why? You promised you would stay in your room. You promised you would take your evening medication." I froze. "What are you talking about?" I asked. "We have a dinner reservation. It is my birthday." Gavin stepped out of the driver's seat. He walked around the car, buttoning his suit jacket. He shook his head at me, looking at me like I was a naughty child who had smeared paint on the walls. "Come on, Harry," he said, using the nickname I hated. "Let's not make a scene. You know you get confused when the sun goes down. The doctor warned us about this wandering." I stepped back, my heels hitting the edge of the curb. "I am not wandering," I shouted. "I drove here. My car is with the valet." Victoria turned to the diners watching us, her eyes filling with tears that looked remarkably real. "I am so sorry, everyone," she announced, her voice trembling with practiced sorrow. "Please forgive my father. He is battling severe dementia. He has been getting worse lately. He thinks it is his birthday, but his birthday was 3 months ago. He gets aggressive when he is confused. Please just ignore him." The lie was so bold, so complete, that for a split second I questioned myself. Was it my birthday? Yes. It was October 14th. I was sure of it. But the way she said it, the way Gavin looked at me with that patronizing smirk, it made the ground feel unstable. "Victoria," I said, my voice low and desperate. "Stop this. Why are you doing this?" She ignored me. She nodded to the 2 large security guards who had emerged from the restaurant. "Please," she said, wiping a tear. "Help us get him to the car. He can be dangerous when he is having an episode." The guards did not ask questions. They saw a well-dressed woman crying and an old man shouting. They made their choice. They grabbed my arms. Their grip was like iron. "Unhand me!" I roared. "I am a structural engineer. I built the bridge you drove over to get here. I have rights." But my shouting only confirmed their narrative. To the onlookers, I was just a senile old man having a public meltdown. They dragged me away from the door. I stumbled, my polished shoes scraping against the concrete. They did not just escort me, they threw me, literally tossed me onto the wet pavement near the parking lot entrance like a bag of unwanted trash. "Take him home," Gavin said to the guards, handing them a $20 bill as a tip. "We will pull the car around. We just need a moment to apologize to the management." They went inside. My own daughter left me sitting on the wet ground while she went inside to charm the manager who had just humiliated me. The rain began to fall harder now. Cold, biting drops that soaked through my suit jacket and chilled me to the marrow. I sat there for a moment, too stunned to move. The shame was a physical weight crushing my chest. I saw the faces of people passing by. Some looked away in embarrassment. Others looked with pity. Poor old man, losing his mind. Probably doesn't even know his own name. I struggled to my feet, clinging to a lamppost for support. My knees shook. Maybe they were right. Maybe I was losing it. How could my own flesh and blood do this if there wasn't some truth to it? Victoria was my little girl. I had paid for her college. I had walked her down the aisle. I had held her hand when she scraped her knee. She wouldn't humiliate me like this unless I really was sick. Would she? I stood shivering near the valet stand, trying to wipe the mud off my trousers with a shaking hand. I felt small. I felt invisible. I was Harrison Caldwell, but in that moment I felt like a ghost haunting my own life. There was a bus stop a few yards away. A man was standing under the cracked plastic awning. He looked rough. He wore a faded flannel shirt with the elbows worn through and jeans stained with dark engine oil. He was holding the hand of a little boy who looked about 6 years old. The boy was shivering too, clutching a backpack that looked too big for him. I turned my back to them. I did not want a stranger to see me crying. I did not want to be asked for spare change when I had just been told my credit cards were dead. I expected the man to ignore me, or worse, to mock the crazy old man who got thrown out of the fancy restaurant. But he didn't. I heard heavy boots crunching on the wet gravel. The man walked straight out of the shelter of the bus stop and into the rain. He walked right up to me. He was tall, with a jaw covered in stubble and eyes that looked like they had seen too many hard nights. He stood close to me, too close. I flinched, expecting him to grab me or demand my watch, but he didn't. He reached out and brushed a wet leaf off my shoulder. His touch was surprisingly gentle. He looked toward the restaurant doors where Victoria and Gavin were still inside, probably laughing, probably toasting to their performance. Then he leaned down. His voice was low, rough, like gravel grinding together, but clear as a bell. "Listen to me, old man," he whispered. I looked up at him, startled. "You are not crazy," he said. The words hit me harder than the rain. I stared at him. "I am a mechanic at the shop on 4th Street, he continued, speaking fast, his eyes darting around to make sure no one was listening. "I fixed the brakes on a black SUV last week. Your son-in-law's car. He was on the phone while I was under the hood. He didn't think the grease monkey was listening." He laughed. The man paused, looking me dead in the eye. "He told someone on the phone that tonight was the big show. He said they were going to provoke you, get you to cause a scene in public, so they could use the police report to get an emergency medical hold. He said, 'You are not sick, Harrison.' He called you a stubborn old mule who was sitting on a gold mine." I couldn't breathe. My heart hammered against my ribs. "Who are you?" I whispered. He ignored the question. "Check your car," he said, urgency entering his voice. "The vintage Lincoln. He borrowed it last week, didn't he? Check the spare tire well in the trunk. There are papers in there. He hid them. He said if he gets pulled over, he wants the cops to find them in your car, not his. It is a setup, old man. A total setup." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a crumpled, greasy business card. He shoved it into my jacket pocket. "My name is Lucas. If you want to survive this night, do not get in that car with them. Or if you do, you better be ready to fight. Because they aren't taking you home to sleep. They are taking you straight to a facility." Before I could ask another question, he turned and walked back to the little boy. He picked the child up, shielding him from the rain, and they disappeared around the corner just as the black SUV pulled up to the curb. Victoria rolled down the window. "Get in, Dad," she said, her voice sickly sweet again. "Let's go home." I touched the card in my pocket. The cold rain didn't feel so cold anymore. It felt like fuel. I wasn't crazy. I was at war. And as I opened the car door, I knew one thing for certain. They had messed with the wrong engineer. The ride back to the estate was suffocating. Rain lashed against the tinted windows of the SUV, creating a rhythm that matched the pounding in my temples. I sat in the back seat, the leather cold against my legs. I reached into my pocket for my iPhone, needing to check the time, or perhaps just needing a connection to the outside world. But Victoria's hand shot out faster than a viper. She snatched the device from my grip with a speed that startled me. "Dad, you know the doctor said screen time agitates your condition," she said, her voice dripping with that sickeningly sweet concern she had perfected over the last few months. "You have lost 3 phones this year already. I will keep this safe for you until you are more stable." I opened my mouth to protest, to tell her that I had not lost a phone since 1998, but I clamped my jaw shut. I remembered Lucas's words. It is a setup. Anything I said now, any anger I showed, would only be fuel for their fire. They wanted me to scream. They wanted me to fight so they could tell the doctors I was aggressive. I looked at the door handle. It was a reflex. I just wanted to crack the window to let in some fresh air, to dispel the overwhelming scent of Gavin's cheap cologne. I pulled the lever. Nothing happened. I pulled it again, harder. The door was dead. I looked up and saw Gavin watching me in the rearview mirror. His eyes crinkled at the corners as he met my gaze. Child lock. Harry, he said casually, turning the steering wheel with one hand. We cannot have you trying to jump out into traffic like you did last week. Can we? I had never jumped into traffic in my life. The lie was so casual, so easily spoken, that it terrified me more than the locked door. They were building a narrative brick by brick, and I was trapped inside it. Gavin began to whistle. It was a cheerful, upbeat tune that clashed violently with the dread pooling in my stomach. He tapped his fingers on the steering wheel, looking for all the world like a man who had just won the lottery. And perhaps in his mind, he had. He had successfully humiliated me in public, isolated me from my allies, and now he was driving me to a prison of his own making. I sat back, sinking into the seat. My engineer's mind began to race. If the door is locked, I need another exit. If the phone is gone, I need another line of communication. I closed my eyes, pretending to doze off, but my ears were straining, catching every shift in gear, every hum of the engine waiting for my moment. When the car finally pulled into the driveway of the house I had built with my own money 30 years ago, it did not look like home anymore. It looked like a fortress. The heavy iron gates swung shut behind us with a finality that sent a shiver down my spine. Victoria helped me out of the car, gripping my elbow with unnecessary force, her nails digging into my suit jacket. "Let's get you to bed, Dad," she said, steering me toward the front door. "It has been a big emotional night for you." Inside the house was quiet. Too quiet. The familiar ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway sounded like a countdown. They marched me upstairs to the master suite. I reached for the handle of my bedroom door, expecting it to turn, but it was locked. Victoria pulled a key from her pocket, unlocking it with a sharp click. "We are going to have to keep this locked from the outside at night," she explained, ushering me in. "For your safety. We don't want you wandering down the stairs and falling." I stepped into the room. It was my room, but it felt wrong. The air was stale. I walked to the bay window overlooking the garden, the window I used to open every night to let in the breeze. I tried to slide it up. It wouldn't budge. I looked closer. My heart stopped. There were 4 heavy-duty screws driven directly through the frame into the sash. They had nailed the windows shut. This was not about safety. This was containment, a fire hazard, a violation of every building code I had ever respected. "Here, Dad, take this." Victoria was standing behind me holding a glass of water and a small blister pack containing a single yellow pill. It wasn't my blood pressure medication. It wasn't my cholesterol pill. It was something I had never seen before. "What is this?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "It is a new relaxant the specialist prescribed," she said, "to help with the agitation. It will help you sleep without those terrible nightmares you have been having." I didn't have nightmares. Or I didn't until tonight. I looked at the pill. I looked at Gavin leaning against the doorframe, arms crossed, watching me like a hawk. If I refused, they would force me. Or worse, they would call the paramedics and claim I was refusing treatment, another mark against my sanity. "Okay," I said, forcing a weak smile. "I am tired." I popped the pill into my mouth, but I didn't swallow. I used a trick I had seen in old war movies, sliding the tablet under my tongue and pressing it into the soft tissue there, hoping it wouldn't dissolve too quickly. I took a large gulp of water, tilting my head back, exaggerating the swallow. I opened my mouth to show them it was gone. "Good night, Harry," Gavin said, stepping back and pulling the door shut. The lock clicked. I was alone. I rushed to the bathroom, spitting the pill into the toilet and flushing it immediately. My hands were shaking. I splashed cold water on my face, staring at the old man in the mirror. "You are not done yet, Harrison," I told myself. "You are just getting started." I waited. I sat in the darkness of my room, listening. I heard their footsteps downstairs. I heard the clink of wine glasses. They were celebrating. I watched the digital clock by my bedside table. 10 p.m. Midnight. 1 a.m. Finally, the house went completely silent. At 2 a.m., I made my move. They had locked the bedroom door, but they had forgotten one thing. I was the one who designed this house. I knew its secrets. Behind the walk-in closet, there was a small access panel for the plumbing stack that ran down to the laundry room on the ground floor. It was tight, meant for maintenance, but I had kept myself fit. I pushed aside the rack of winter coats and pried the panel loose with a metal shoehorn. The crawl space was dusty and smelled of dry rot, but I squeezed through, sliding down the pipes, until I reached the laundry chute. It was a terrifying drop, but I braced my legs against the sides, sliding down inch by inch, until I landed softly in the pile of linens in the laundry basket below. I was out. I crept through the kitchen, avoiding the squeaky floorboard near the refrigerator, another flaw I knew by heart. I made my way to the garage. The air was freezing. The concrete floor numbed my feet through my socks, but I didn't care. There it was, my vintage Lincoln Continental parked next to Gavin's SUV. I approached the trunk. My hands trembled as I popped the latch. It groaned softly in the silence, and I froze, waiting for an alarm or a footstep. Nothing. I lifted the heavy trunk lid. The spare tire was buried under a carpeted cover. I ripped it aside. I unscrewed the wing nut, holding the tire in place, my breathing shallow and ragged. I hauled the heavy rubber wheel out of the well. Lucas was right. Taped to the inside of the wheel well in a waterproof Ziploc bag was a thick stack of documents. I tore the bag open, pulling out the papers under the dim light of the garage door opener. My eyes scanned the first page. Petition for emergency conservatorship. It claimed I was a danger to myself and others, citing incidents that never happened. It was dated for tomorrow. They were going to file this the moment the court opened. I flipped the page. Durable power of attorney. It was signed. My signature. But I had never signed it. It was a forgery, a good one, but I could see the hesitation in the ink flow on the loops of the H. Gavin had practiced, but he wasn't perfect. But the third document made me gasp audibly. It was a loan agreement, a high-interest short-term loan from a private lending company, the kind run by people who break kneecaps when you miss a payment. The borrower was listed as Harrison Caldwell. The collateral was my estate, my stocks, and my life insurance policy. The amount was $2 million. I flipped to the disbursement schedule. The money had already been approved pending the confirmation of the conservatorship. The date for the first repayment was next week. I felt like I had been punched in the gut. Gavin wasn't just trying to control me. He was drowning. He had gambled or squandered everything he had, and now he was using my life, my reputation, and my home as a life raft. If this went through, I wouldn't just be in a nursing home. I would be destitute. The house would be foreclosed. The legacy I built for my family would be wiped out to pay his debts. I heard a noise above me. The floorboards in the master bedroom creaked. Gavin was awake. I shoved the papers back into the bag. I didn't have time to put the tire back. I grabbed the bag and scrambled behind the workbench, crouching in the shadows, just as the door from the house opened. Gavin walked into the garage. He was wearing his robe, holding a flashlight. The beam swept across the room. It landed on the open trunk of the Lincoln. It landed on the spare tire lying on the floor. "Who is there?" he hissed, his voice trembling with a mix of fear and aggression. I held my breath, clutching the evidence to my chest. I was cornered, trapped in my own garage with the man who wanted to erase my existence. And I knew in that moment that this was no longer a family dispute. This was a fight for survival. I stayed crouched behind the workbench in the garage for what felt like an hour, listening to Gavin's footsteps fade as he went back inside the house. He had not seen me, but the close call sent a jolt of adrenaline through my system that made my hands shake uncontrollably. I knew I could not stay in the garage, and I certainly could not go back to sleep in that locked room without a plan. I needed to reach Lucas. I needed an ally on the outside because inside these walls I was completely cut off. Victoria had my iPhone, and the landlines were likely monitored. I crept back into the house through the side door, my socks sliding silently on the polished hardwood floors I had installed 20 years ago. Instead of heading back upstairs, I moved toward the basement door. It was disguised as a pantry panel, a design choice I made to keep the utility access hidden. I slipped inside and descended the narrow wooden stairs into the darkness. The basement smelled of cedar and old sawdust, a scent that always calmed me. This was my workshop, the place where I used to build birdhouses with Victoria when she was a little girl, before she became a stranger who wanted to lock me away. I fumbled for the string of the overhead light, but stopped. Light spilling from under the door would give me away. I had to do this by feel. I navigated the cluttered space by memory, running my hand along the edge of the workbench until my fingers brushed against the cold metal of my old red tool chest. Bottom drawer. Back left corner. I prayed it was still there. My fingers closed around a small, rectangular object. It was my old Motorola flip phone, a relic from my days supervising construction sites, when smartphones were too fragile to survive the dust and grit. I flipped it open. The screen remained black. My heart sank. Of course it was dead. It had been sitting there for a decade. But then I remembered the emergency battery pack I kept in the survival kit for earthquake preparedness. I fumbled through the plastic bin, tearing open the package. I plugged the phone in and held my breath. 1 second, 2 seconds. The tiny screen flickered to life, glowing with a faint blue light. It had 12% battery. It was enough. I pulled the greasy business card Lucas had given me from my pocket, squinting to read the number in the dim glow. I punched the digits in my thumb, feeling clumsy on the rubber keypad. It rang 3 times. "Yeah, who is this?" A groggy voice answered. "It is the old man from the restaurant." I whispered, my voice barely audible. "Harrison." I found the papers. "Lucas, you were right. They are leveraging everything." There was a pause on the line, and then the sound of rustling like someone sitting up in bed. "I told you, Harrison, listen, you need to get out of there." "I cannot," I said. "They have locked the windows and they are watching me." "But I have a plan. I need you to be at the corner of Oak and Maple at 9 o'clock tomorrow morning. Can you do that?" "I will be there," Lucas said without hesitation. "Watch your back, old man." I hung up and hid the phone inside a hollowed-out book on the shelf titled Structural Dynamics. I made my way back upstairs and slipped into my room just as the first light of dawn began to bleed through the curtains. I lay on top of the covers, fully dressed, my heart pounding against my ribs, waiting for the performance of my life to begin. When Victoria unlocked my door at 8 o'clock, I was sitting in the armchair, staring blankly at the wall. I let my mouth hang open slightly and slumped my shoulders intentionally, making myself look smaller and frailer than I was. "Dad," she said, her voice thick with fake cheerfulness. "Did you sleep well? I brought you some oatmeal." I looked at her slowly, blinking, as if it took effort to focus. "I just want to see the birds," mumbled, slurring my words slightly. "The garden. I need air." Victoria sighed, checking her watch. She was dressed for a meeting, probably with the lawyers, to finalize my conservatorship. "Fine," she said, checking her phone. 10 minutes, Dad. But stay within the perimeter. The gates are locked, so do not get any ideas about wandering off." She escorted me to the back patio and watched me shuffle toward the rose bushes. As soon as she turned back to take a call, I dropped the act. I moved with a speed that would have shocked her. I headed straight for the east wall of the estate. This was the one flaw in the security system I knew about, because I was the one who had neglected to fix it. The old oak tree had grown wild, its heavy branches draping over the top of the brick wall, creating a natural canopy that blocked the view of the surveillance camera mounted on the corner. I had meant to trim it for months, But my procrastination was now my salvation. I reached the wall. It was 6 feet high. In my 40s, I could have vaulted over it. At 70, it looked like Mount Everest. I grabbed a low-hanging branch and pulled myself up, groaning, as pain shot through my arthritic shoulder. I scrambled for a foothold, my expensive dress shoes slipping on the mossy bricks. I grit my teeth, thinking of the smile on Gavin's face when he handed me that pill. I refused to die in that house. With a final heave, I rolled over the top of the wall and dropped down onto the sidewalk on the other side, landing hard on my knees. I bit back a cry of pain. I stood up, dusting off my trousers, and limped toward the corner. A beat-up Ford pickup truck with a rusted fender was idling at the curb. The engine sounded like a coffee grinder full of rocks, but to me it sounded like a chariot. The passenger door swung open, and Lucas looked at me, his eyes widening as he took in my disheveled appearance. "Get in," he said, "before they check the cameras." I climbed into the cab. The seat was covered in duct tape, and the floor was littered with fast food wrappers. But as we pulled away from the gilded cage of my estate, I took the deepest breath I had taken in months. I was out. But I knew this was only a temporary reprieve. We drove in silence for 20 minutes, leaving the manicured lawns of my neighborhood behind and entering the industrial district where the air smelled of diesel and exhaust. Lucas pulled the truck into a small garage sandwiched between a pawn shop and a liquor store. The sign above the door was faded and missing letters, but inside it was organized and clean. He killed the engine. "Home sweet home," he muttered. I stepped out and looked around. In the corner of the shop, on a lumpy sofa with the stuffing coming out, a small boy was sleeping, curled up under a thin blanket. A school textbook was open on his chest. It was Leo. "He is suspended," Lucas said quietly, looking at his son with a mixture of love and shame. "I couldn't afford the after-school program this week, so he has to stay here with me while I work." I walked over and looked at the boy. He was dreaming, his face peaceful amidst the grease and noise of the shop. It reminded me of Victoria when she was that age, sleeping in my office while I drafted blueprints late into the night. A lump formed in my throat. "Why are you helping me, Lucas?" I asked, turning to face the mechanic. "You barely know me." Lucas wiped his hands on a rag and walked over to a metal cabinet. He pulled out a digital voice recorder. "Because Gavin isn't just a bad son-in-law," Lucas said, his voice hard. "He is dangerous. He owns the building I rent for my apartment. He knows I am behind on rent because of the legal fees for my custody battle with my ex. He came to me 2 weeks ago. He offered to wipe my debt if I did a job for him." "What job?" I asked, though I dreaded the answer. "He wanted me to tamper with the brakes on your Lincoln," Lucas said, looking me dead in the eye. "He didn't want you dead, just hurt. Enough to put you in the hospital for a few weeks so you couldn't attend the hearing. He said old men get confused with pedals all the time. My blood ran cold. My own family." "I refused," Lucas continued. "I told him I ain't a killer. He laughed and said I would regret it. He said he would evict me and make sure I never saw Leo again. That is when I started recording him." Lucas pressed play on the device. Through the tinny speaker, I heard Gavin's voice, arrogant and cruel. "Listen, grease monkey, nobody cares about a guy like you. But me? I am about to come into a lot of money. The old man is on his way out one way or another. If you don't help me frame him as incompetent, I will burn your life to the ground. You will be living in this truck with that brat of yours." The recording clicked off. The silence in the garage was heavy. "He owes money to some bad people," Harrison Lucas said. "Online gambling, crypto schemes. He is in the hole for millions. He needs your estate to pay them off or they are going to break his legs. That is why he is rushing the conservatorship. He is desperate, and desperate men do terrible things." I looked at Lucas, a man with nothing who refused to compromise his morality. And then I thought of Gavin, a man who had everything and wanted to kill for more. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out my wallet. It was empty of cash, but I still had my checkbook, which I kept hidden in my inner pocket. "Lucas," I said, my voice steady, "I am going to make you a deal. You are going to be my eyes and ears. You are going to help me expose them. We are going to install cameras. We are going to get into his computer, and we are going to bring this whole house of cards down." "And in return?" Lucas asked, crossing his arms. I looked at the sleeping boy on the couch. "I will hire the best family lawyer in the city for you," I said. "You will get full custody of Leo, and I will pay off your debts. Not as charity, but as a salary. You work for me now." Lucas looked at me for a long moment, searching my face for any sign of deception. He saw none. He extended a calloused, grease-stained hand. "Deal," he said. We shook hands. And in that grimy garage, amidst the smell of our oil and desperation, an alliance was formed that would shake the foundations of my family to its core. "Now let's get to work," I said, rolling up my sleeves. "We have a war to win." I made it back over the garden wall with seconds to spare, my heart hammering against my ribs, like a bird trapped in a cage. I scrambled up the trellis and slipped through the unlocked patio door, just as I heard Victoria's heels clicking on the hardwood floor of the hallway. I didn't have time to shower, so I rubbed dirt from the garden onto my knees and elbows and messed up my hair until I looked like a man who had spent the night wrestling with demons. When I walked into the kitchen, Gavin and Victoria were sitting at the marble island drinking espresso. They stopped mid-sip, staring at me with a mixture of disgust and triumph. They didn't see a structural engineer who had just secured a vital alliance. They saw a confused, dirty old man, and I decided right then to give them exactly the show they wanted. I shuffled toward the table, my eyes unfocused. I sat down heavily, grabbing a piece of toast with my bare hands, ignoring the plate. Victoria wrinkled her nose. "Dad, you are filthy," she snapped. "Where have you been?" I didn't answer. Instead, I looked directly at Gavin. He was wearing a silk tie I had bought him for Christmas 3 years ago. "You are a thief," I mumbled, letting a little bit of saliva gather at the corner of my mouth. "A petty little thief." Gavin slammed his cup down. "What did you call me, old man?" I giggled, a high-pitched sound that grated on my own ears. "A thief," I repeated, pointing at the butter dish. "You stole the butter. The Queen is going to be furious." Gavin relaxed, leaning back with a sneer. "He is losing it, Vic. He thinks I stole the butter. But I wasn't looking at the butter. I was looking at the fear in his eyes that he quickly masked with arrogance." I decided to escalate. I needed them to stop seeing me as a threat and start seeing me as a burden. A disgusting, manageable burden. I focused on my bladder. It was the hardest thing I have ever had to do as a man who prided himself on dignity, but I forced my muscles to relax. A dark stain began to spread across the front of my light gray trousers. The sound of liquid hitting the floor was unmistakable. Victoria shrieked, pushing her chair back so hard it scraped loudly against the floor. "Oh my God, Dad! That is disgusting!" Gavin stood up, covering his nose with his hand. "Jesus, Harry. You are like an animal. Look at you." I just sat there chewing my toast, staring blankly ahead while the warm humiliation soaked into my skin. It worked. The suspicion in their eyes vanished, replaced entirely by revulsion. They didn't want to interrogate me about where I had been. They just wanted me out of their sight. "Clean him up," Gavin said, walking out of the room. "And call the doctor. We need that evaluation today." By noon, the house smelled of bleach and expensive cologne. The doctor Gavin had summoned arrived in a silver Mercedes that cost more than most people earn in a decade. Dr. Sterling was a man in his 40s with a tan that looked artificial and a suit that was too tight. He walked into the living room where Victoria had posed me on the sofa. I was clean now, dressed in pajamas, acting the part of the invalid. But my eyes were sharp. As Dr. Sterling reached out to check my pulse, his sleeve rode up. There it was, an 18-karat gold Rolex Submariner. I knew the market price, $40,000. A public health psychiatrist on a state salary does not wear a $40,000 watch unless he has a side business in falsifying medical records. Dr. Sterling sat down, opening a leather folder. "Hello, Harrison. Do you know where you are?" I looked at the watch, then at his face. "I am in a bank," I said, my voice raspy. "And you are the teller. But your watch is fake, just like your degree." Gavin, who was standing by the fireplace, stiffened. Dr. Sterling didn't even blink. He smiled a shark-like smile. Disorientation, paranoia, delusions of persecution. He wrote quickly on his notepad. He didn't ask me about the date or the president. He pulled out a series of inkblot cards. "What do you see here, Harrison?" I looked at the black smudge. It looked like a bat. But I decided to play his game with a twist. "I see a signature," I whispered, leaning in close. "A forged signature on a loan document. And I see a man going to prison for insurance fraud." "Doctor." Sterling paused, his pen hovering over the paper. For a second, the mask slipped. He looked at Gavin, then back at me. His eyes were cold, devoid of any medical empathy. "This is classic projection," he announced loudly for Victoria's benefit. "The patient is projecting his own moral failings onto others. He is creating complex narratives to cope with his cognitive decline." He stood up, snapping the folder shut. He had spent less than 10 minutes with me. "I have seen enough," he told Victoria. "Your father is suffering from advanced rapid-onset dementia with aggressive tendencies. He is no longer capable of making financial or personal decisions. In my professional opinion, he requires immediate 24-hour secure care." Victoria let out a dramatic sigh of relief, clutching Gavin's arm. "Thank you, Doctor. We just want what is best for him." Dr. Sterling handed her a document. "This is my official evaluation. Submit this to the court. It will fast-track the conservatorship." As he shook Gavin's hand, I saw Gavin slip a thick white envelope into the doctor's palm. The transaction was complete. My life had just been sold for the price of a luxury watch. That evening, the atmosphere in the house shifted from tension to celebration. Victoria came into my room without knocking. She didn't unlock the window. She didn't bring me dinner. She stood at the foot of the bed, holding a glossy brochure. "Good news, Dad," she said, her voice flat. "The court hearing is set for next Tuesday. But don't worry, you won't have to stress about it. We have found a wonderful place for you to live." She tossed the brochure onto my lap. The cover showed a generic stock photo of happy old people playing chess under a bright sun. The words "Sunny Meadows Assisted Living" were printed in cheerful font. I knew Sunny Meadows. It was a facility on the outskirts of the city, notorious for health code violations and understaffing. It was a warehouse for the forgotten, a place where people went to die quietly of bedsores and neglect. The monthly fee was a fraction of what my care cost here, which meant Gavin would pocket the difference from my pension. "We are moving you there right after the hearing," Victoria said, turning to leave. "Pack a small bag. You won't need much, just the basics. No suits, no books, just comfortable clothes." She paused at the door, looking at me one last time. "It is for the best, Dad. You are just too much for us to handle." The door clicked shut, and the lock turned. I waited until I heard her footsteps fade down the hall. My hands were shaking not from age, but from a cold fury that focused my mind like a laser. They thought they had won. They thought the game was over because the referee was on their payroll. But they forgot that I was the one who designed the stadium. I went to the bookshelf and pulled down the hollowed-out copy of Structural Dynamics. I took out the burner phone. The battery was at 8%. I typed a single message to Lucas. My fingers flew across the keypad. They moved the timeline up. Hearing is Tuesday. Destination is Sunny Meadows. Initiate Plan B immediately. I am ready to burn it down. I pressed send. I watched the little envelope icon spin and then disappear. Message sent. I lay back on the bed staring at the ceiling. In 3 days, I would either be a free man or a prisoner for the rest of my life. I closed my eyes, and for the first time in years, I didn't pray for peace. I prayed for a storm. I waited until the digital clock on the microwave blinked 3 in the morning before I made my move. The house was silent, wrapped in the suffocating quiet of a prison, but my mind was loud with calculations. I knew the plumbing in this house better than I knew the lines on my own face because I had drawn the schematics myself. The PVC trap under the kitchen island sink was the weak point. It was durable enough for daily use, but it had a stress fracture I had noticed 6 months ago and never got around to replacing. Now that negligence was my weapon. I slid out of my room using a credit card to shim the lock, a trick I had perfected over the last 2 nights of captivity, and crept down the stairs. My knees ached and my heart hammered against my ribs, but I forced myself to move with the stealth of a much younger man. I crawled under the cabinet, the smell of dish soap and old moisture filling my nose. I found the pipe. I didn't need a wrench. I just needed leverage and the right angle of pressure. I braced my feet against the cabinet wall, grabbed the U-bend with both hands, and pulled with every ounce of strength left in my 70-year-old body. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a sickening crack, the plastic sheared. A torrent of cold water exploded outward, hitting me in the chest and soaking my pajamas instantly. I scrambled back, closing the cabinet door just as the water began to flood across the expensive Italian marble floor. I retreated to the shadows of the hallway and waited. It didn't take long. Water finds a way. It seeped under the pantry door and triggered the moisture alarm I had installed 5 years ago. The shrill, piercing shriek of the siren tore through the silence. Upstairs, I heard thumping footsteps. Victoria was the first to reach the landing, screaming about a flood. Gavin followed close behind, cursing loudly. I stepped out into the light, shivering and feigning confusion. "Is it raining inside?" I asked innocently. Gavin ignored me, wading into the kitchen where 2 inches of water were already lapping at the baseboards. "Turn off the main valve," he shouted at Victoria, but she was frozen in panic. He dove under the sink, getting soaked in the process. "We need a plumber," Victoria wailed, looking at her ruined floors. "Call Mr. Henderson." "No," Gavin snapped, standing up, dripping wet and furious. "We are not calling Henderson. He talks too much. If he sees the old man like this or sees the locks on the windows, the whole town will know by morning. Hand me my phone." He tapped furiously on the screen, searching for a stranger. I held my breath. I had spent $2,000 of my secret emergency fund, boosting Lucas's fake plumbing website to the top of the local search results. It was a gamble, a digital roll of the dice. "Here is one," Gavin said, wiping water from his eyes. "Rapid response plumbing. 24-hour service. 5 stars." He hit the call button. I exhaled slowly. The trap was set. 40 minutes later, a white van with magnetic decals on the side pulled into the driveway. Lucas stepped out. He looked unrecognizable. He wore a stained blue jumpsuit, a tool belt that looked like it weighed 50 pounds, and a pair of thick glasses that magnified his eyes, making him look harmless and slightly dim-witted. He carried a heavy metal toolbox in one hand and a pipe wrench in the other. I sat at the kitchen table wrapped in a towel, watching Gavin pace back and forth like a caged tiger. "Fix it fast," Gavin growled at Lucas, not even offering a handshake. "And keep your mouth shut about the locks. We have a sensitive situation here." Lucas nodded, keeping his head down, playing the part perfectly. "Just here to fix pipes, boss. I don't see nothing else." Lucas slid under the sink and began banging metal against metal, making a racket that covered the sound of our breathing. I needed to get the USB drive to him. It was taped to the inside of my wrist, hidden by the long sleeve of my wet pajama top. It contained a keylogger program, a piece of software that would record every keystroke Gavin made on his laptop, giving us his passwords, his emails, and access to the offshore accounts he was using to hide my money. But Gavin was hovering over Lucas, watching every move. I needed a reason to get close. "I am thirsty," I croaked loudly. "I need water." Victoria rolled her eyes. "The kitchen is flooded, Dad. Sit down." I stood up, shaking violently, acting out the tremors of the withdrawal from the medication I had been spitting out. "I need water now," I shouted, letting my voice crack. I lunged toward the sink, stumbling on the wet floor. "Watch out!" Gavin yelled, grabbing my arm, but I twisted away, falling forward and slamming my hand onto the counter right next to Lucas's head. Lucas reached up instinctively to steady me. In that split second of contact amidst the chaos and the shouting, I slid the small black drive from my sleeve into his gloved palm. His fingers closed over it instantly. "I got him." "Boss," Lucas said, hoisting me up with surprising strength while slipping his hand into his pocket. "Just a little slip." Gavin shoved me back toward the chair. "Sit down or I will tie you to it," he hissed. The first phase was done, but the second was harder. The USB needed to be plugged into Gavin's laptop, which was sitting on the desk in his study down the hall, not in the kitchen. Lucas needed a reason to leave the room. "Bad news, boss," Lucas said, crawling out from under the sink, wiping grease on his jumpsuit. "The main line is cracked further back. The pressure valve is blown. I need to check the regulator. Usually it is in the utility closet or near the electrical panel." Gavin narrowed his eyes. "It is in the garage." Lucas shook his head. "No, I mean the sub-regulator. In these big houses, it is usually near the home office or the den. If I don't release the pressure, the whole system could blow." Gavin hesitated. He looked at the water still pooling on the floor. "Fine. The office is that way." He pointed down the hall. "But I am coming with you." My heart sank. If Gavin watched him, Lucas would never be able to plug in the drive. I needed a distraction. A big one. I watched them walk down the hallway. I looked around the room. My eyes landed on the pedestal in the foyer, where Victoria kept her prized possession. A Ming Dynasty vase she had bought at auction with my money 2 years ago. It was worth $50,000. It was the perfect casualty. I stood up again. "Dad, sit down," Victoria warned, stepping toward me. I didn't listen. I let out a low, guttural moan, rolling my eyes back into my head. I began to convulse my body, jerking rhythmically. I flailed my arms wildly, knocking a chair over with a crash. "He is having a seizure!" Victoria screamed, her voice piercing the air. "Gavin, help!" Gavin stopped in the hallway just outside the study door. He looked back, torn between his paranoia and the medical emergency. When I fell to the floor, thrashing and kicking, he made his choice. He ran back toward the kitchen. "Don't let him swallow his tongue," he yelled. I watched through half-closed eyes as Gavin knelt beside me, pinning my shoulders to the wet floor. I saw Lucas disappear into the study. I began to count in my head. 1, 2, 3. It takes 10 seconds to boot the drive, another 10 to install the script, 5 to remove it. He needed 30 seconds. I kept thrashing, frothing at the mouth slightly to sell the performance. Victoria was crying, trying to hold my legs. Gavin was shouting instructions. 20 seconds. I let the convulsions slow down, whimpering softly. 25 seconds. I went limp, feigning unconsciousness. Gavin sat back, breathing hard, wiping sweat from his forehead. "Is he dead?" Victoria whispered, horrified. "No, his pulse is fine," Gavin said, checking my neck. "Just another episode." God, I hate this old man. "Where is the plumber?" Gavin asked suddenly, his head snapping up. He stood up, leaving me on the floor, and sprinted back toward the study. I lay there, paralyzed with fear. If Lucas was still at the desk, it was over. Gavin burst into the hallway. "Hey!" he shouted. Lucas walked out of the powder room adjacent to the study, zipping up his jumpsuit calmly. "Sorry, boss," Lucas said, shrugging. "Nature called. All that running water, you know." Gavin stared at him, suspicion burning in his eyes. He pushed past Lucas and entered the study. He scanned the room. The laptop was sitting exactly where he had left it, the screen dark. He checked the drawers. He checked the safe. Everything looked undisturbed. He turned back to Lucas, who was standing in the doorway holding a large pipe wrench, looking bored. "Did you find the regulator?" Gavin asked, his voice icy. "Yeah," Lucas said, pointing to a panel in the hallway ceiling. "Just needed to tighten the valve. You are good to go." Gavin stared at him for a long, uncomfortable moment. "Get your tools," he said finally. "Fix the sink and get out." I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. We had done it. The virus was inside the veins of his operation. Now we just had to wait for the infection to spread. The hours ticked by slowly in my locked room, while the house settled into an uneasy silence. I retrieved the burner phone from the hollowed-out book on structural engineering, checking for a signal. The screen illuminated the dark room with a harsh blue light, and there was a new message from Lucas. I opened the attachment he had sent, and as I read the text, the blood in my veins turned to ice. The keylogger had done its job perfectly, capturing every search term and every website Gavin had visited in the last 3 hours. I expected to see gambling sites or offshore bank accounts. I expected to see emails to corrupt lawyers or real estate agents. But what I saw was far worse. Gavin had been navigating the dark web using an encrypted browser. His search history was a roadmap to premeditated murder. How to induce cardiac arrest without detection. Symptoms of digoxin overdose in elderly patients. Lethal dosage for a man of 200 pounds. I stared at the glowing screen, my hand trembling uncontrollably. Digoxin. It was a medication used to treat heart failure, but in high doses, it caused the heart to beat chaotically until it simply stopped. To a coroner, it would look like a natural heart attack, especially in a 70-year-old man who had recently been diagnosed with high stress and dementia. They were not planning to send me to Sunny Meadows after the hearing. The hearing was just a contingency plan. They were planning to kill me before I ever stepped foot in a courtroom. They wanted the life insurance payout, and they wanted it now. I realized with a terrifying clarity that I was no longer waiting for a rescue. I was waiting for an execution. I hid the phone back in the book and sat on the edge of the bed. My breathing was shallow. I had to stay calm. If I panicked, I would make a mistake. I had to think like an engineer. Identify the failure point. Assess the load. Reinforce the structure. My heart was the target. Food and drink were the delivery systems. I could not eat anything they prepared. I could not drink anything they poured. But I had to keep playing the part of the confused invalid, or they would find another more violent way to finish the job. A knock at the door made me jump. The lock clicked open, and Victoria entered. She was smiling, but it was a brittle, strained smile that didn't reach her eyes. Behind her, Gavin loomed in the hallway, his face pale and sweaty. "Dinner time, Dad," Victoria said, her voice overly bright. "We thought you might like a treat tonight." I followed them downstairs to the kitchen. The water from the broken pipe had been mopped up, but the floor was still damp and the smell of bleach lingered in the air, masking the underlying tension. They sat me at the head of the table. There was no food on my plate, just a large ceramic mug steaming gently. "I made you some warm milk with honey," Victoria said, placing the mug in front of me. "It will help you sleep. You have had such a stressful day with the plumbing accident and your episode." She stepped back, standing next to Gavin. They were both watching me. Neither of them had a drink. Neither of them sat down. "Drink up, Harry," Gavin said, his voice tight. "It is good for your bones." I looked down at the white liquid. It looked innocent enough. Steam curled off the surface. I reached out with a shaking hand grasping the handle. I lifted the mug slowly, bringing it toward my face. As the steam hit my nose, my olfactory senses, honed by years of inspecting chemical treatments on construction sites, picked up a faint anomaly. Underneath the sweetness of the honey and the dairy, there was a metallic, bitter scent. Almonds. Not the sweet kind used in baking, but the sharp chemical tang of cheap binding agents used in pharmaceuticals. They had crushed the pills. They had dissolved them in the heat. My stomach churned. This was it. The lethal dose. If I drank this, my heart would stop before morning. I looked at Victoria. My little girl. The girl I had taught to ride a bike. The girl I had held when she cried over her first heartbreak. She was standing there waiting for her father to die so she could keep her swimming pool and her country club membership. The betrayal hurt more than any poison ever could. It smells funny, I mumbled, lowering the mug slightly. It is just the organic honey, Dad, Victoria said quickly, her voice pitching up an octave. It is very expensive. Please just drink it. Gavin took a step forward. Stop being a baby, Harry. Drink the milk. I knew I had seconds to act. I could not refuse to drink it without breaking character, but I certainly could not swallow it. I needed an accident. A clumsy, senile accident. I lifted the mug again, my hand shaking violently. This time the tremors were real, born of pure adrenaline. I looked at Gavin. I saw the beads of sweat on his upper lip. He was terrified. He was a coward who couldn't look me in the eye while he tried to kill me. I brought the mug to my lips. Gavin leaned in, holding his breath. Now. I let my wrist go limp. The heavy ceramic mug slipped from my fingers. It hit the edge of the table with a loud clatter and spun off, crashing onto the tile floor. The mug shattered. Hot milk splashed everywhere, pooling rapidly around the leg of the table. "Oh, for God's sake!" Gavin shouted, jumping back. "You clumsy old fool!" Victoria let out a cry of frustration. "Dad, look what you did." I sat there staring at the mess, shrinking back into my chair. "I am sorry," I whined. "My hands. They are so slippery." Under the table, Victoria's prize Persian cat, Mittens, a pampered creature that usually ignored everyone, emerged from the shadows. Attracted by the smell of the warm milk and honey, the cat began to lap up the puddle near my foot. No, I thought. Not the cat. But I couldn't stop it. If I yelled to stop the cat, I would reveal that I knew the milk was dangerous. I had to sit there and watch. "Get a towel," Gavin snapped at Victoria. Victoria rushed to the pantry. The cat continued to drink, its rough pink tongue lapping up the white liquid greedily. I watched in horror, counting the seconds. Digoxin acts fast on a human, but on a 10-pound animal the effect would be almost instantaneous. The cat stopped drinking. It shook its head, sneezing once. Then it let out a low, guttural yowl that sounded demonic. "Mittens," Victoria asked, coming back with a roll of paper towels. "What is wrong with her?" The cat arched its back, its fur standing on end. Then it fell onto its side legs, paddling frantically against the wet floor. Foam, white and frothy, began to bubble from its mouth. Its eyes rolled back into its head. "Oh my God!" Victoria screamed, dropping the towels. "Mittens!" The cat seized violently, its small body thrashing in the poisoned milk. It let out one final wheezing breath and then went still. Its eyes were open and glassy, staring up at the ceiling. The kitchen was deathly silent. The only sound was the hum of the refrigerator. Victoria fell to her knees, sobbing, reaching out for her pet, but too afraid to touch it. Gavin stood frozen, his face draining of all color. He looked from the dead cat to the shattered mug, and then slowly he looked up at me. The realization hit him like a physical blow. The amount of poison in that cup was enough to kill a horse. If I had drunk it, I would be the one on the floor, frothing at the mouth. I sat up straight in my chair. I stopped shaking. I let the confused look drop from my face just for a second. I locked eyes with Gavin. My gaze was cold, steady, and filled with a judgment that terrified him more than the police ever could. I pointed a finger at the dead animal. That cat had a weak heart. I said, my voice clear and devoid of any tremor. Just like you, Gavin. Gavin stumbled back, hitting the counter. He knew. In that moment, he knew that I wasn't senile. He knew I was awake. And he knew that the war had just begun. The death of the cat changed everything. The pretense of a caring family struggling with a senile elder evaporated the moment that poor animal seized on the kitchen floor. Gavin did not even pretend to mourn. He looked at me with eyes that were no longer masking his intent, but broadcasting it. He knew that I knew. The silent war we had been fighting with glances and innuendos had just turned into an open siege. He dragged me back upstairs by the arm, his grip bruising my bicep, and threw me into my bedroom. This time, the lock didn't just click. I heard the sound of a heavy deadbolt being installed from the outside. A few hours later, the view from my window revealed the true extent of my imprisonment. 2 men dressed in cheap black suits were patrolling the perimeter of the garden. They were not police. They were private security, the kind you hire when you want muscle, not questions. I pressed my ear against the bedroom door and heard heavy footsteps in the hallway. Gavin had stationed a guard right outside my room. I was completely cut off. I could not sneak out to the garage because the moment I opened the door, I would be tackled. I could not use the burner phone because the battery had finally died, and without a charger, it was nothing more than a plastic brick. I was trapped in the house I built, isolated in a room full of memories that now felt like a mausoleum. Hunger began to gnaw at me, but I refused to touch the tray of food they slid into the room. I flushed it down the toilet to make them think I was eating, but I survived on tap water from the bathroom sink. I sat in the dark, analyzing my structural integrity. My body was weak. My joints ached from the dampness, but my mind was still calculating. I knew Gavin was terrified. A man who hires guards to watch a 70-year-old grandfather is a man who is losing control. He was escalating because he was desperate, and desperation makes people sloppy. I just had to wait for the mistake. The silence of the next day was maddening. I paced the room, measuring the floorboards, counting the cracks in the ceiling, trying to keep my mind sharp. I worried about Lucas. He would be waiting for a signal that would never come. If he thought I had been caught, or worse, if he thought I was dead, he might retreat. He might take his son and run to protect them. I wouldn't blame him. I was just an old man with a checkbook and a sad story. Why would he risk his life for me? As the sun began to set, casting long orange shadows across the room, I fell into a fit of despair. Maybe I had overestimated my allies. Maybe I was going to lose this house and end up drooling in a medicated stupor at Sunny Meadows after all. Then I heard it. A faint buzzing sound, like a large angry hornet. I ignored it at first, thinking it was the stress playing tricks on my ears. But the sound grew louder, distinct, and mechanical. It was coming from outside the window. I rushed to the glass, pressing my face against the cold pane. Hovering there, right at the level of the second story, was a small quadcopter drone. It was bright red, a child's toy painted with racing stripes, but it was flying with precision. It bobbed in the wind, the rotors humming, struggling against the evening breeze. I squinted. Hanging from the bottom of the drone on a piece of fishing line was a tiny black object. My heart leaped. Lucas. He hadn't abandoned me. He had improvised. I tried to open the window, but the nails Gavin had driven into the frame held fast. I couldn't break the glass without alerting the guard outside my door. The drone pilot seemed to understand my predicament. The machine hovered closer, the plastic propellers dangerously close to the glass. It bumped gently against the window pane. Tap, tap, tap. I looked at the latch. I couldn't open it, but the old wood of the sash had rotted slightly in the corner, a defect I had noted on my last inspection. I grabbed a metal letter opener from my desk and jammed it into the rotting wood. I dug frantically, carving out a small hole just big enough for a finger. The drone hovered steady, The fishing line swung toward the hole. It took 3 tries, but finally the small black object swung through the gap I had created. I grabbed it, snapping the line. The drone immediately pulled up and zoomed away, disappearing over the tree line. I looked at the object in my palm. It was a tiny wireless earpiece, the kind security details use. I pressed it into my ear. At first, there was only static. Then a voice crackled through, clear and urgent. "Harrison, do not speak. Just listen." It was Lucas. "I know you are trapped. I saw the goons outside. Listen to me carefully. The hearing is at 9 a.m. tomorrow. They are going to drug you before they take you. Do not eat or drink anything. When you get to the courthouse, do not fight them in the parking lot. Wait until you are inside. Wait until there are witnesses. I have the files. I have the recordings. And I have a surprise for Gavin. Just stay alive, old man. We are coming for you." The connection cut. I sat on the floor, clutching the tiny piece of plastic like it was a lifeline. I wasn't alone. I closed my eyes, and for the first time in days, I slept not the sleep of the exhausted, but the sleep of a soldier the night before the battle. The morning of the hearing arrived with a heavy gray sky that promised a storm. At 7 a.m., the door to my room burst open. Gavin didn't come in alone this time. 2 men entered behind him. They were massive, wearing ill-fitting suits that strained against their thick necks. They looked like they broke bones for a living, not guarded estates. Gavin looked manic. His eyes were bloodshot, and he smelled of stale whiskey and mints. He threw a suit bag onto the bed. "Get dressed," he snapped. "And don't try anything funny. These gentlemen are here to assist you." I moved slowly, pretending to struggle with the buttons of my shirt. I let them dress me like a doll. I wanted them to feel powerful. I wanted them to think I was broken. When I was fully dressed in my charcoal suit, the one I had worn to Lillian's funeral, they grabbed me. 1 guard on each arm. Their grip was painful, lifting me almost off my feet as they marched me out of the room. We didn't walk down the stairs, we descended like a prisoner transfer. I looked for Victoria, but she was nowhere to be seen. She was probably already at the courthouse playing the role of the grieving daughter. We reached the front door. The air outside was heavy and humid. The black SUV was waiting, the engine idling. As the guards shoved me toward the car, Gavin stopped me. He grabbed my face, squeezing my jaw hard, forcing me to look at him. He leaned in close, his breath hot against my ear. "Listen to me, you old bat," he whispered, his voice trembling with a mix of rage and fear. "I know you have been up to something. I don't know how you did it, but I know you have been talking to someone." He paused, letting the threat hang in the air. "If you say 1 word out of line in that courtroom today, if you try to act sane, if you try to speak to the judge, I will make a phone call, and my friends will pay a visit to that little garage on 4th Street. My blood ran cold. I stiffened. "Oh, yes," Gavin hissed, seeing the recognition in my eyes. "I know about the mechanic, and I know about his kid. You want to play hero, go ahead. But if you do that, shop burns down with them inside. Do you understand me?" He didn't wait for an answer. He shoved me into the back seat of the car and slammed the door. The lock clicked. I sat there staring at the back of his head as the car pulled away from the house. My hands were shaking, but not from fear for myself. I was terrified for Leo. Gavin had crossed the final line. He wasn't just a thief or a liar. He was a monster who threatened children. I touched the tiny earpiece still hidden deep in my ear canal. Lucas couldn't hear me, but I prayed he was ready, because the stakes had just risen from money to life and death. As the courthouse came into view, looming like a gray fortress against the sky, I made a vow. Gavin was going to burn for this. But first, I had to survive the next hour without getting the only people who cared about me killed. The courtroom smelled of lemon furniture polish and old lies. I sat in a wheelchair that Gavin had insisted I use, claiming it was for my own safety, but I knew it was a prop designed to make me look frail and dependent. My hands rested on my knees, which I kept deliberately still, resisting the urge to grip the armrests until my knuckles turned white. To my left sat the architects of my destruction. Victoria had traded her designer silk dresses for a modest gray cardigan and flat shoes. She wore no makeup, and her hair was pulled back in a messy bun. To the judge, she looked like a devoted daughter, exhausted by the burden of caring for a senile father. To me, she looked like a viper shedding its skin to blend into the grass. Her lawyer, a man named Blackwood, with a smile as sharp as a razor, stood up to present the opening arguments. He did not shout. He spoke in a low, sympathetic tone that was far more dangerous. "Your Honor, we are here today with heavy hearts. This is not a petition we file lightly. It is a desperate measure to protect a beloved father from himself." He gestured toward a large monitor on the wall. "I would like to submit Exhibit A, a video recording from the night of October 14th at the Gilded Oak restaurant." The screen flickered to life. I watched in silence as the footage played. It was masterfully edited. They had cut out the first 5 minutes where the manager refused to seat me. They had cut out the part where I spoke calmly and rationally, asking for an explanation. All the court saw was a clip of me shouting at the security guards, my face twisted in anger, screaming that I was a structural engineer and that I built the bridge. Out of context, I didn't look righteous. I looked unhinged. I looked dangerous. Blackwood paused the video on a frame where my mouth was open in a shout, and my eyes looked wild. "As you can see, Your Honor, Mr. Caldwell exhibits sudden and violent outbursts in public spaces. He is disconnected from reality. But this is just the tip of the iceberg." He picked up a thick file. "We have here a sworn affidavit from Dr. Sterling, a renowned psychiatrist, stating that Mr. Caldwell is in the advanced stages of aggressive dementia. The doctor notes that the patient creates elaborate paranoid fantasies involving his family members trying to harm him." Victoria let out a soft, practiced sob, covering her mouth with a tissue. Blackwood placed a comforting hand on her shoulder before turning back to the judge. "We also have statements from the neighbors reporting loud crashing noises and screaming coming from the residents at all hours. They describe a man out of control, a man who is a danger to himself and those around him." The narrative was seamless. They had taken every one of my attempts to fight back, the broken pipe, the scene in the kitchen, and twisted them into symptoms of my decline. I sat there listening to them dismantle my life brick by brick, my face a mask of vacant confusion, while inside a fire raged hot enough to melt steel. Judge Reynolds, a stern woman with graying hair and glasses perched on the end of her nose, looked from the lawyer to me. Her expression was not one of malice, but of pity. And that pity terrified me more than Gavin's threats. "Malice you can fight. Pity is a heavy blanket that smothers you." She looked at the wheelchair. She looked at my slumped shoulders and my bowed head. She saw exactly what they wanted her to see. A husk of a man. Mr. Blackwood continued his assault. "Given the severity of the diagnosis and the rapid escalation of these violent episodes, we are petitioning for full and immediate conservatorship over Harrison Caldwell's person and estate. We are asking for the power to manage all financial assets, including the liquidation of the primary residence, to cover medical costs. Furthermore, we request the court's permission to transfer Mr. Caldwell to a secure residential facility where he can receive the 24-hour supervision he clearly needs." He paused for effect before delivering the final blow. "We have secured a bed at Sunny Meadows Assisted Living. They are ready to receive him immediately following this hearing." Sunny Meadows? The name hung in the air like a toxic cloud. I knew the place. It was a converted warehouse on the edge of the industrial district. It had been investigated 3 times in the last decade for patient neglect. It was a place where they sedated the residents to keep them quiet, and where families stopped visiting after a few months. It was a dumping ground. and Gavin was sitting there leaning forward slightly, unable to hide the gleam of triumph in his eyes. He wasn't just sending me away. He was burying me alive. The lawyer sat down looking satisfied. Victoria dabbed at her dry eyes and looked up at the judge with a pleading expression. "Please, Your Honor," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I love my father so much. I just want him to be safe. I can't handle him at home anymore. I am afraid he will hurt himself or burn the house down. It breaks my heart, but this is the only way." It was a performance worthy of an Oscar. The courtroom was silent. The stenographer typed rhythmically, the only sound in the room. I could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on me. This was the turning point. If the gavel came down now, my life as a free man was over. My assets would be sold to pay Gavin's gambling debts, and I would die alone in a room that smelled of urine and despair. Judge Reynolds cleared her throat. She shuffled the papers on her bench, reviewing the forged medical report and the misleading financial statements. She took off her glasses and rubbed the bridge of her nose. "The evidence seems conclusive," she said, her voice echoing in the high-ceilinged room. "The medical report is quite alarming, and the video evidence speaks to a profound loss of control." She looked down at me again. "Mr. Caldwell." I did not move. I stared at a scuff mark on the floor tiling, keeping my breathing shallow. "Mr. Caldwell," she repeated louder this time. "Do you understand why you are here today?" I slowly lifted my head. I let my jaw slacken slightly. I looked at her with glassy eyes, letting my gaze drift past her, as if I were seeing things that weren't there. I didn't say a word. To speak now would be to validate Dr. Sterling's claim that I was aggressive and argumentative. My silence was my shield. The judge sighed. "The record will show that the respondent is non-responsive." Gavin nudged Victoria with his elbow. I saw it out of the corner of my eye. He leaned in close to her, and I heard the faintest whisper. "We got him. It is done." They were celebrating. They were already spending the money. They were already imagining the party they would throw tonight in my house. Judge Reynolds picked up her gavel. The wood felt heavy in her hand, I could tell. She didn't enjoy this, but she saw no other option. The law required her to protect the vulnerable, and in her eyes, I was the most vulnerable person in the room. Based on the evidence presented and the lack of objection from the respondent, she began, her voice formal and final. "I find that Harrison Caldwell is incapacitated and unable to manage his own affairs. I am prepared to grant the petition for conservatorship to his daughter, Victoria Caldwell, effective immediately." She raised the gavel. I watched it rise. Time seemed to slow down. I could see the dust motes dancing in the shaft of light from the high window. I could hear the intake of breath from Victoria. I could feel the cold metal of the earpiece inside my ear. "Where are you, Lucas?" I screamed in my head. "Where are you?" The gavel began its descent, a piece of wood that would shatter my life. And then thunder struck. Not from the sky outside, but from the back of the courtroom. The heavy double doors of the main entrance didn't just open. They were thrown open with such force that they banged against the back walls with a sound like a gunshot. Bam! Every head in the room snapped around. The judge froze the gavel, hovering inches above the sounding block. Gavin twisted in his seat, his eyes widening in alarm. Victoria gasped, her hand flying to her chest. I didn't turn around. I didn't have to. A smile, a small, cold smile that I finally allowed myself to show, curled the corner of my lip. The cavalry had arrived. The doors swung shut behind Lucas and the man he was dragging by the arm. The silence that followed was heavy, the kind of silence that happens right before a dam bursts. I twisted in my wheelchair to look. Lucas was wearing a cheap suit that was a size too big for him, likely bought at a thrift store that morning, but he wore it like armor. His jaw was set and his eyes were blazing, but it was the man beside him who made the air leave the room. It was Paul, the manager of the Gilded Oak, the man who had sneered at me 5 days ago and blocked my entrance. But the arrogance was gone. He looked like a man who hadn't slept in a week. His skin was gray, his expensive suit was rumpled, and his eyes darted around the room like a trapped animal. He wasn't there as a character witness for Victoria. He was there because he had nothing left to lose. Lucas marched him down the center aisle, ignoring the bailiff who was stepping forward to intercept them. "Your Honor," Lucas shouted, his voice echoing off the mahogany walls. "Before you sign that paper, you need to hear this. This man has something to say about the character of Gavin Reynolds." Victoria's lawyer Blackwood jumped to his feet, his face turning a blotchy red. "Objection, Your Honor. This is highly irregular. Who are these people? This is a private hearing. Remove them immediately." But Gavin wasn't looking at the lawyer. He was looking at Paul. And for the first time, I saw true, unadulterated terror on my son-in-law's face. He stood up, knocking his chair over. "Get them out of here," he screamed, his voice cracking. "This is harassment. That man is a stalker." Judge Reynolds slammed her gavel down. "Order. Order in this court." She looked at Lucas, then at Paul. She was a judge who had seen everything, and she knew that people didn't burst into courtrooms unless they were crazy or desperate. She pointed the handle of her gavel at Paul. "Step forward," she commanded. "Who are you, and why are you disrupting my court?" Paul walked to the railing. He gripped the wood so hard his knuckles turned white. He looked at Gavin, then at me, then finally at the judge. "My name is Paul Miller," he said, his voice shaking. "I manage the Gilded Oak, and I am here because Gavin Reynolds stole $50,000 from me." The courtroom gasped. Gavin lunged forward, but his own lawyer held him back. "Liar," Gavin hissed. "You are a liar." Paul didn't flinch. "He promised me a guaranteed return on a cryptocurrency exchange," he said, tears welling in his eyes. "He showed me the charts. He used Mr. Caldwell's name, said he was investing too. I gave him my life savings, my daughter's tuition money. Yesterday the website went dark. The money is gone. And when I called him to ask about it, he told me that if I ever spoke to anyone, he would ruin me." He pointed a trembling finger at Gavin. "He isn't protecting Mr. Caldwell. Your Honor, he is broke. He is running a Ponzi scheme, and he needs the old man's estate to pay off the sharks before they come for him." Blackwood roared. "Objection. This is hearsay. It is irrelevant to the competency of the respondent. This is a financial dispute that belongs in civil court, not a conservatorship hearing. Your Honor, I move to have these men arrested for contempt." The judge looked conflicted. Procedurally, the lawyer was right. This was messy. It was unverified. She looked ready to dismiss them to restore order to her courtroom. "I will not have my court turned into a circus," she said sternly. "Unless there is direct evidence relating to Mr. Caldwell's mental state, I cannot entertain this interruption. Mr. Bailiff, please escort these gentlemen out." This was the moment. The pivot point on which my entire future balanced. If Paul left, I lost. I could feel the eyes of everyone in the room on me. The crazy old man in the wheelchair, the invalid, the victim. I took a deep breath. The air in the courtroom tasted stale, but to me it tasted like freedom. I placed my hands on the armrests of the wheelchair. I pushed. The metal creaked. Victoria turned to look at me, her eyes widening. "Dad, sit down," she hissed. "You are making a scene." I ignored her. I engaged my core muscles, the ones I had kept strong despite their attempts to wither me away. I stood up. I didn't wobble. I didn't shake. I stood to my full height of 6 feet, my spine straight, my shoulders back. I buttoned my suit jacket with steady hands. The room went deathly silent. Even the lawyer stopped shouting. I looked at the judge. I didn't look past her. I looked right into her pupils, with the piercing intensity that had terrified contractors for 40 years. Your Honor, I said. My voice was not the raspy mumble of a dementia patient. It was a baritone rumble, clear and authoritative. It was the voice of a man who commanded respect. Your Honor, I request permission to present new evidence. Victoria let out a small strangled sound, like a mouse being stepped on. She grabbed my arm. Dad, please stop, you are confused. I pulled my arm away. The motion was sharp and decisive. Don't touch me, I said coldly. I turned to the judge. I am not confused, Judge Reynolds. I am not senile. And I am certainly not incapacitated. For the last 5 days, I have been held prisoner in my own home, drugged against my will, and subjected to a psychological campaign designed to make me appear incompetent. I gestured to the screen where the video had played. That video was edited. The medical report was purchased with a luxury watch, and the man sitting there acting the part of the concerned son-in-law is a predator who tried to poison me 2 nights ago. Gavin's face went from pale to purple. He is lying, he screamed. He is paranoid. Listen to him. He thinks everyone is trying to kill him. This proves he is crazy. Blackwood jumped in. Your Honor, clearly the respondent is having a lucid episode, but his delusions of persecution are textbook symptoms of... I cut him off. I am an engineer, Mr. Blackwood, I said, stepping out from behind the defense table. I deal in facts. I deal in structural integrity. And I never make a claim I cannot prove. I reached into the inner pocket of my jacket. The movement made the bailiff reach for his belt, but the judge raised a hand to stop him. She was captivated. She was watching a resurrection. I pulled out a slender silver pen. It was a high-fidelity voice recorder, the kind I used to dictate site reports. This is not a delusion, I said, holding the pen up for the room to see. This is a recording taken this morning at 7:15 in the driveway of my home. I looked at Gavin. He stopped breathing. He knew exactly what was on that tape. He made a move toward me, a desperate lunge to grab the device, but Lucas stepped in his path, blocking him with a chest like a granite wall. I pressed the play button. The audio was crystal clear, amplified by the courtroom's acoustics. Gavin's voice, sneering and cruel, filled the room. If you say one word out of line in that courtroom today, I will make a phone call, and my friends will pay a visit to that little garage on 4th Street. You want to play hero? Go ahead. But if you do, that shop burns down with them inside. I let the silence hang in the air after the recording stopped. It was a heavy, suffocating silence. I turned to the judge. That is a threat of arson and murder against a witness and a child, Your Honor. Does that sound like the concern of a loving family member? Or does it sound like a man desperate to cover his tracks? Judge Reynolds's face had turned to stone. The pity was gone, replaced by a cold fury that radiated from the bench. She looked at Gavin, who was now trembling visibly. She looked at Victoria, who had sunk into her chair, covering her face with her hands. This is not a conservatorship hearing anymore, she said quietly. She looked at the bailiff standing by the exit. Lock the doors, she ordered. Nobody leaves this room. All eyes in the courtroom were fixed on the heavy double doors that had just swung open, interrupting the judge's final sentence. Standing there, framed by the hallway light, was Lucas. He looked out of place in this sterile environment of wood paneling and legal statutes. He was wearing his mechanic jumpsuit still stained with oil, and he held a red toolbox in one hand, as if he were here to fix a leak rather than a legal proceeding. But it wasn't Lucas who made the air leave the room. It was the man standing behind him, a man I knew well, a man who just days ago had looked down his nose at me with a sneer of superiority. Paul, the manager of the Gilded Oak. But this was not the Paul I remembered. The arrogant posture was gone. The crisp tuxedo was replaced by a wrinkled shirt and trousers that looked like he had slept in them. His face was pale, unshaven, and etched with a deep, terrifying anxiety. He looked like a man who had stared into the abyss and realized he had jumped in. Gavin turned in his seat. I heard the sharp intake of breath hiss through his teeth. It was the sound of a predator realizing the trap had snapped shut on its own leg. He tried to stand up, his face flushing a deep crimson. "Who is this?" he demanded, his voice cracking. "Your Honor, I demand these intruders be removed. This is a private hearing." Lucas didn't flinch. He walked straight down the center aisle, his heavy work boots clacking loudly against the floor. He didn't look at Gavin. He looked straight at Judge Reynolds. "I am sorry to interrupt, Your Honor." Lucas said, his voice rough but steady. "But I have a witness here who claims he was coerced into banning Mr. Caldwell from his establishment. And he claims that the petitioner, Gavin Finch, stole $50,000 from him in the same Ponzi scheme he is trying to use Mr. Caldwell's money to cover up." The courtroom erupted into whispers. Paul stepped forward, clutching a stack of papers to his chest like a shield. He looked at Gavin with a mixture of fear and hatred. "It is true," Paul stammered, his voice barely audible. "He told me if I kicked the old man out and made a scene, he would double my investment in his crypto fund. I gave him my life savings, my daughter's tuition money. And yesterday, when I asked for it back, he laughed at me. He told me the money was gone." Gavin slammed his hand on the table. "You are a liar," he screamed, losing all composure. "I have never seen this man in my life." "Mr. Blackwood." The lawyer stood up, adjusting his tie nervously. "Your Honor, this is highly irregular. These are unsubstantiated claims from a disgruntled service worker. I move to have them removed immediately and proceed with the ruling." Judge Reynolds looked at Paul, then at Gavin. Her eyes narrowed behind her spectacles. The gavel she still held in her hand slowly lowered to the desk, but she did not strike it. She was listening. I watched Victoria. She had turned the color of ash. Her hands were gripping the edge of the defendant's table so hard, her knuckles were white. She looked at me for the first time, not with contempt, but with pure terror. She knew. She knew that the wall of lies they had built was made of paper, and someone had just lit a match. It was time. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the stale air of the courtroom. I placed my hands on the armrests of the wheelchair they had forced me into, the symbol of my weakness. Mr. Blackwood was still arguing, pointing a finger at Lucas. "This is a circus, Your Honor. My client's father is a senile invalid who doesn't even know where he is. This interruption is distressing him. Look at him. He is confused." I gripped the metal arms. I engaged my core muscles, the ones that had climbed scaffolding and walked steel beams for 40 years. "I am not confused, Mr. Blackwood." My voice cut through the noise like a diamond cutter through glass. It was deep, resonant, and completely devoid of the tremor I had faked for weeks. The room went dead silent. Even the stenographer stopped typing. I pushed myself up. The wheelchair creaked as I relieved it of my weight. I stood slowly, unfolding my 6-foot frame to its full height. I straightened my spine, shaking off the slump of the broken old man. I buttoned my suit jacket with steady hands. I looked at the judge, standing tall and proud, a structural engineer once again. "I am not confused," I repeated, my voice booming off the back walls. "And I am certainly not an invalid." Victoria let out a small, strangled cry. She covered her mouth with her hand, shrinking back into her chair as if she were seeing a ghost. Gavin froze, his mouth hanging open in a silent scream of disbelief. Harrison Judge Reynolds said, her voice filled with shock. "Mr. Caldwell, you are lucid." "I am more than lucid." "Your Honor," I said, stepping away from the wheelchair and kicking it aside. It rolled away, hitting the railing with a metallic clang. "I have spent the last 14 days pretending to be the man my daughter wanted me to be. A helpless burden, a senile fool. I allowed them to drug me. I allowed them to imprison me in my own home. I allowed them to humiliate me in public, all to gather the evidence necessary to show you exactly who is standing before you. I walked toward the bench. My stride was strong. I felt the energy of the room shift. The pity was gone, replaced by awe and a rising tension that felt like electricity. I demand the right to speak, I said, looking directly at the judge. And I demand the right to present new evidence. Evidence that will prove that this petition for conservatorship is nothing more than a getaway car for a robbery in progress. Objection, Blackwood shouted, but his voice was shrill and desperate. Your Honor, he is having an episode. This is a moment of clarity amidst the dementia. It is common. It proves nothing. Sit down, Counselor Judge Reynolds snapped, her voice sharp as a whip. Her eyes were fixed on me. Go on, Mr. Caldwell. I am listening. I reached into the inner pocket of my jacket. Gavin flinched as if I were drawing a weapon. In a way, I was. I pulled out the small black digital recording pen, the one I had kept hidden in the lining of my suit, the one Lucas had dropped to me via drone. My son-in-law claims he loves me, I said, holding the pen up for the room to see. He claims he wants to protect me from the world. But last night on the way to this courthouse, he whispered his true intentions into my ear. He thought I was too broken to understand. He thought I was alone. I pressed the play button. The audio was crisp and clear, amplified by the silence of the courtroom. Gavin's voice, sneering and cruel, filled the space. I know you have been up to something. I don't know how you did it, but I know you have been talking to someone. If you say one word out of line in that courtroom today, I will make a phone call, and my friends will pay a visit to that little garage on 4th Street. You want to play hero? Go ahead. But if you do, that shop burns down with them inside. Do you understand me? The recording ended with a click. The reaction was visceral. A collective gasp swept through the gallery. The court reporter put a hand to her throat. Judge Reynolds's face went from curiosity to a dark, thunderous fury. She looked at Gavin not as a litigant, but as a criminal. Gavin was shaking his head violently. That is not me, he stammered, backing away from the table. That is AI. Deepfake. He made it up. He is crazy. But then I played the second file. It was from the kitchen. The sound of a cat meowing. The sound of milk splashing on the floor. Dad, look what you did. Get a towel. Oh my God, mittens. Then silence. And then my voice from the recording, calm and cold. That cat had a weak heart, just like you, Gavin. I clicked the pen off. That was 2 nights ago, I told the judge. They tried to feed me milk laced with digoxin, a heart medication I do not take. When I spilled it on the floor, the cat drank it. The cat is dead, buried in the backyard. If you send a coroner to exhume the animal, you will find lethal levels of the drug in its system. They didn't want to put me in a home, Your Honor. They wanted to put me in a grave. Victoria burst into tears, but they were not the pretty tears of a victim. They were the ugly, hysterical sobs of the guilty. She grabbed Gavin's arm, shaking him. You told me it was safe, she screamed. You told me he wouldn't know. Gavin shoved her away. Shut up, he roared. Shut up, you stupid cow! Order, Judge Reynolds shouted, banging her gavel so hard it sounded like a gunshot. Order in this court. But the chaos had already erupted. Gavin looked at the door. He looked at Lucas, who was blocking the aisle, his arms crossed, his biceps bulging under the grease-stained jumpsuit. He looked at the bailiff, who was already moving his hand toward his belt. Run, Gavin hissed to himself. He lunged. Not toward me, but toward the side exit, the door reserved for court staff. Bailiff, secure the doors, Judge Reynolds commanded, standing up and pointing a finger at Gavin. Nobody leaves this room. Lock it down. Now. The heavy thud of the electronic locks engaging echoed through the chamber. Gavin slammed into the door frantically, jiggling the handle, but it was dead. He turned around, his back to the wood, trapped like a rat in a cage. I stood in the center of the room, surrounded by the wreckage of their lies. I looked at Lucas and gave him a small nod. He nodded back. We had done it. The trap had sprung, and now it was time for the final reckoning. Lucas moved with a calm deliberation that was terrifying to behold. He did not look at Gavin, who was still pressing his back against the locked door like a trapped animal. He did not look at Victoria, who was sobbing into her hands at the defendant's table. He walked straight to the clerk's desk where the main evidence monitor was connected. He pulled a small silver flash drive from the pocket of his greasy jumpsuit. The same drive he had risked his freedom to extract from my house. He plugged it in. "Your Honor," Lucas said, his voice flat and hard. "You have heard the audio. Now I would like you to see the video." This footage was captured 2 nights ago by a drone hovering outside the kitchen window of the Caldwell estate. It documents the preparation of the beverage Mr. Caldwell was forced to drink. The large screen on the wall flickered. Static danced for a second, before resolving into a high-definition image. The angle was high, looking down through the upper panes of the kitchen window, but the clarity was undeniable. The courtroom went deathly silent. It was the kind of silence that feels heavy, like the air before a tornado touches down. On the screen, we saw the kitchen. We saw Gavin standing at the island. He was crushing something in a mortar and pestle. The camera zoomed in digitally. Yellow pills. The distinct shape of the heart medications I had seen in his bathroom cabinet. I watched myself on the screen, a ghost of the man I am now sitting, slumped in the chair, feigning confusion. I watched Gavin sweep the white powder into the steaming mug of milk. I saw him stir it vigorously, his face twisted in a look of intense concentration. He added the honey, trying to mask the bitterness. The video played on, mercilessly. It showed Victoria entering the frame. She did not ask what he was doing. She did not question the powder. She leaned against the counter and asked a question that made the entire gallery gasp. "Did you use enough, Gavin, the video?" Victoria asked, her voice tinny but clear through the drone's microphone. "If this does not work by morning, the loan sharks said they are coming for the car. We need the insurance payout to clear before the weekend." Gavin turned to her on screen. "It is enough to kill a horse, Vic. Once the old man drinks this, he goes to sleep, and his heart just stops. The coroner will write it off as natural causes due to stress. We sell the house, pay off the debt, and put the rest in the Cayman account. Just make sure you cry loud enough at the funeral." In the courtroom, the real Victoria let out a wail of despair, but nobody looked at her with sympathy anymore. The jury of public opinion had returned its verdict in seconds. The video continued. It showed the moment I knocked the cup over. It showed the cat emerging from under the table. And then came the moment that turned the stomachs of even the hardened bailiffs. The video showed the cat drinking the milk. It showed the seizure. The small animal thrashing on the wet tiles. But the camera did not focus on the cat. Lucas had panned the footage to focus on the faces of the humans in the room. We saw Gavin recoil in horror, realizing the potency of his poison. But then we saw Victoria. On the screen, as her beloved pet lay dying in agony, Victoria did not rush to help it. She did not scream for a vet. For a brief second, before she realized the implications, she covered her mouth to stifle a reaction. But it was not a sob. The high-resolution footage showed the crinkling of her eyes, the slight upturn of her cheeks. She was relieved. She was relieved that it was the cat, and not her inheritance, that was ruined. She looked at Gavin and shrugged a gesture of chilling indifference that said everything about her soul. The screen went black. The silence in the courtroom was broken by the sound of Judge Reynolds slowly taking off her glasses. Her hands were shaking. She looked at the lawyer, Mr. Blackwood, who was now standing as far away from his clients as the small space allowed his face pale and slick with sweat. "Counselor," the judge said, her voice barely a whisper yet, carrying to every corner of the room. "You brought a petition to this court. to protect a vulnerable man. Instead, you have inadvertently provided evidence of attempted capital murder, conspiracy to commit insurance fraud, and elder abuse of the most heinous nature. Gavin let out a sound that was half sob, half growl. The reality of his situation had finally penetrated the fog of his arrogance. He looked at the screen, then at the judge, and finally his eyes landed on the laptop sitting on the clerk's desk. The laptop that was still connected to the flash drive, the only physical copy of the video file in the room. Panic is a powerful drug. It overrides logic. It overrides self-preservation. Gavin pushed off the door with a burst of manic energy. He didn't run for the exit. He ran for the desk. "I will kill you!" he screamed, his voice shredding his throat. "You ruined everything!" He scrambled over the railing, dividing the gallery from the court floor. He wasn't looking at me. He was focused entirely on destroying the evidence. He reached for the laptop, his fingers clawing at the air. "Bailiff," the judge shouted, ducking behind her bench. But the bailiff was on the other side of the room. Gavin was fast fueled by the adrenaline of a man facing life in prison. He reached the desk, grabbing the laptop and raising it above his head, intending to smash it against the floor. But he never brought it down. Lucas had not moved since the video ended. He had been standing there waiting like a sentinel. Lucas was not a man of violence, but he was a man who spent his days wrestling with rusted engines and heavy steel. He worked with his hands. He built things. And he protected what was his. As Gavin raised the computer, Lucas stepped forward. One step. Efficient. Powerful. He didn't throw a punch. He didn't need to. He drove his shoulder into Gavin's midsection with the force of a battering ram. The sound of the impact was sickening, a dull thud of bone hitting soft tissue. The breath left Gavin's body in a whoosh. He folded in half, the laptop flying from his grip and clattering harmlessly across the floor. Lucas didn't stop. He wrapped his arms around Gavin's waist, lifting the younger man off his feet and slamming him into the floor. It was over in 3 seconds. Lucas pinned Gavin to the ground, his knee pressed firmly into the small of Gavin's back. He twisted Gavin's arm behind him, holding him there with an ease that bordered on casual. Gavin thrashed, trying to bite, trying to kick, but he was helpless against the strength of a man who knew the value of hard work. "Stay down," Lucas growled, his voice low and dangerous. "Or I will break your arm and tell the judge it was an accident." Gavin went limp, sobbing into the carpet. The courtroom erupted into chaos. The bailiffs finally reached the scrum, drawing their tasers. Police officers who had been stationed in the hallway, having been alerted by the lockdown, burst through the side doors, weapons drawn. "Get on the ground! Everyone get on the ground!" the officers shouted. Lucas raised his hands slowly, showing he was not a threat, and backed away from Gavin. The officers swarmed Gavin, pulling his arms back and snapping the handcuffs on with a metallic click that echoed like music in my ears. They hoisted him up. He was bleeding from the cut on his lip, and his expensive suit was torn, but he didn't look like a mastermind anymore. He looked like a child who had broken a vase and was afraid of the punishment. But the drama wasn't over. Victoria was still sitting at the table. She watched her husband being dragged away and realized she was next. Survival instinct, the same instinct that made her nail my windows shut, kicked in. She stood up, shaking violently, tears streaming down her face, ruining her modest makeup. She looked at the police officers approaching her, and then she looked at me. "Daddy," she wailed, dropping to her knees. "Daddy, please, tell them I didn't know." She crawled toward me, her hands reaching out, grasping for the hem of my trousers. "It was him, Daddy. It was all Gavin. He forced me. He said he would hurt me if I didn't help him. I was scared. I didn't want to hurt you. I love you, Daddy. Please don't let them take me." The room watched, holding its breath. It was a compelling performance. The weeping daughter, the abusive husband. For a moment, even the judge seemed to pause. Was it possible? Was she just another victim? I looked down at her. This was the child I had held in my arms minutes after she was born. This was the girl I had taught to drive. The woman I had walked down the aisle just 3 years ago. My heart ached with a pain so profound I thought it might stop beating. To condemn your own child is a tragedy no parent should ever face. But then I remembered the video. I remembered the kitchen. I remembered the cat twitching on the floor. And I remembered her face on that screen. It wasn't fear I had seen. It wasn't coercion. It was calculation. She hadn't been looking at Gavin for permission. She had been looking at him with annoyance because the poison hadn't worked fast enough. I stepped back, pulling my leg away from her grasp. She fell forward onto the floor, her hands clutching at empty air. I looked down at her, my eyes dry and burning. "You were not forced, Victoria," I said, my voice quiet but carrying the weight of a final judgment. "Daddy, please," she sobbed, looking up at me with wide, pleading eyes. "He is a monster. I am your little girl." "No," I said, shaking my head slowly. "A monster is what you become when you watch a living creature die in agony, and your only thought is about the insurance money." She froze, her mouth hanging open. "I saw the video, Victoria." I continued, my voice hardening into steel. "I saw you shrug. I saw you smile when you realized the cat took the poison instead of me. You didn't cry for the cat, and you aren't crying for me now. You are crying for yourself." I turned to the police officer standing next to her. "Officer," I said, pointing at my daughter. "She is a co-conspirator in attempted murder. Get her out of my sight." "No, Daddy, no," Victoria screamed as the officer hauled her to her feet. "You can't do this. I am your family." I turned my back on her. I looked at Lucas, who was standing by the clerk's desk dusting off his jumpsuit. I looked at Paul, the manager, who was weeping silently in relief. I walked over to Lucas and put a hand on his shoulder. "Family," I said loud enough for Victoria to hear as she was dragged through the doors. "Family are the people who stand by you when you have nothing left to give them. You, Victoria, are just a stranger who shares my last name." The heavy doors slammed shut, cutting off her screams. The silence rushed back into the room, but it wasn't heavy anymore. It was light. It was the silence of a storm that had finally passed. I looked at the judge, who was wiping a tear from her eye. "I am sorry for the disruption." "Your Honor," I said, straightening my jacket. "But I believe the petition for conservatorship is now moot." Judge Reynolds smiled, a genuine warm smile. "Petition denied, Mr. Caldwell. You are free to go." I walked out of that courtroom not as an old man who had survived, but as a man who had been reborn. I had lost a daughter, but I had found a son. And as I walked into the sunlight with Lucas by my side, I knew that the best years of my life were not behind me. They were just beginning. The wheels of justice turned slowly for some, but for Gavin and Victoria they spun with the terrifying speed of a buzzsaw. The trial that followed my liberation was not a media circus. It was a surgical excision of a cancer that had been eating away at my life. I sat in the front row of the gallery day after day, watching the prosecutor lay out the timeline of their betrayal. The forged signatures, the dark web searches, the loan shark agreements. It was a tapestry of greed woven with incompetence. When the verdict was read, Gavin did not scream or fight. He simply slumped in his chair, a broken man who had gambled his soul and lost everything. The judge sentenced him to 25 years in a maximum security federal prison for attempted murder and financial fraud. He was led away in chains, not looking back once. Victoria's sentencing was harder to watch, but I forced myself to keep my eyes open. I owed it to the memory of the father I used to be to witness the end of the daughter she had become. She received 15 years for conspiracy and elder abuse. As the bailiffs took her arms, She looked at me across the aisle. Her eyes were dry now. The performance was over. There was no hate in her gaze, just a hollow bewilderment, as if she still couldn't understand how her perfect plan had crumbled. I didn't wave. I didn't look away. I simply nodded a final acknowledgement of the stranger she was, and then I walked out of the courtroom into the fresh air. The aftermath of the financial ruin they had wrought was severe. The loan sharks Gavin had borrowed from were not the kind to forgive debts because the borrower was in prison. My lawyers advised me that the only way to clear the books and protect my pension was to liquidate the estate. The house, the beautiful, sprawling mansion I had built with my own hands 30 years ago, the garden where Lillian had planted her roses, the workshop where I had taught Victoria to hold a hammer, all of it had to go. On the final day before the keys were handed over to the bank, I walked through the empty rooms one last time. The furniture was gone. The walls were bare. The floors echoed with the sound of my footsteps. A younger man might have felt devastated to see his life's work stripped away. But as I stood in the foyer looking at the spot where the Ming vase had once stood, I felt a strange lightness. I realized that this house had ceased to be a home the day Lillian died. For the last 2 years, it had been a prison disguised as a palace. The memories of my wife were not in the drywall or the crown molding. They were in my heart, safe and untouchable. I walked out the front door, locking it for the last time, and tossed the keys to the real estate agent waiting at the curb. "It is just a house," I told him, "and I am ready to find a home." 6 months later, the snow had melted, and the spring air in Chicago was crisp and full of promise. I pulled my new car, a modest but reliable sedan, up to the curb of a brick building in the up-and-coming district of West Loop. It was an old industrial structure that had seen better days, but the brickwork was solid and the foundation was deep. I had spent the last of my liquid assets purchasing it and renovating it in secret. Lucas was waiting for me, on the sidewalk holding Leo's hand. He looked nervous. He was wearing a clean shirt, and he had shaved, but his hands were still stained with the permanent grease of his trade. He thought we were meeting to discuss his legal fees for the custody battle, which I had already paid in full weeks ago. "Harrison," he said, shifting his weight, "look, I appreciate everything you have done, but I can't let you keep spending money on me. I got a job offer at a chain shop. It is minimum wage, but it is steady." I smiled, leaning against the hood of my car. "Lucas, you are a terrible liar. You would hate working for a chain. They wouldn't let you fix things the right way. They would make you upsell unnecessary parts to old ladies." He sighed, looking down at his boots. "Yeah, well, beggars can't be choosers, right?" I walked over to the large bay door of the building. I grabbed the chain hoist and pulled. The metal door rattled and rolled up with a satisfying clatter, revealing the interior. Lucas's jaw dropped. The space was immaculate. 5 brand-new hydraulic lifts stood in a row. The concrete floor was polished and painted a gleaming gray. Along the walls stood rows of top-of-the-line tool chests fully stocked. In the corner was a comfortable customer lounge with a coffee machine and a play area for children. "What is this?" Lucas whispered, walking slowly into the space, his voice echoing in the vast room. I pointed to the sign I had just had installed above the office door. It was covered by a tarp. "Go ahead," I said. "Pull the cord." Lucas walked over. He looked at me, then at Leo, then grabbed the rope. The tarp fell away. The hand-painted sign read simply in bold gold letters, "Caldwell & Sons Auto Repair. Established 2024. Lucas stared at the sign for a long time. He read it once. Then he read it again. He turned to me, his eyes wide and shimmering with unshed tears. "Harrison," he choked out, "you don't have a son." I walked over and placed a hand on his shoulder. The shoulder of the man who had pulled me out of the rain. The man who had tackled a criminal to save my life. "I do now," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "I can't leave you a fortune, Lucas. The lawyers took most of it. But I can leave you a legacy. This is yours. 50-50 partners. You run the shop, I handle the books, and we build something honest. Something that lasts. Lucas didn't say anything. He couldn't. He just pulled me into a crushing hug, burying his face in my shoulder. I held him tight, feeling the strength of a bond that was forged in fire. Leo ran over, hugging my leg, shouting about the toy cars in the waiting area. In that moment, standing in the smell of fresh paint and new rubber, I felt richer than I ever had in the mansion on the hill. That evening, to celebrate the grand opening, we went back to where it all began. The Gilded Oak. I walked in the front door, not as a trembling old man, but as a partner in a thriving business. The air smelled of roasted garlic and rosemary, just as it had on that terrible night, but this time the atmosphere was warm. Paul was waiting for us at the host stand. He looked 10 years younger. His suit was pressed, and his smile was genuine. When he saw us, he didn't block the way. He rushed forward, shaking my hand with both of his. "Mr. Caldwell," he said, beaming, "and Mr. Lucas, welcome back. Your table is ready, the best table in the house." He led us to the corner booth, the one Lillian and I used to love. It was set with the finest crystal, and a bottle of vintage champagne was already chilling in a silver bucket. "On the house," Paul said, winking at Leo. "For the little detective." We sat down. The restaurant was bustling, but for me the noise faded into the background. I looked at Lucas, who was reading the menu to Leo, explaining what a truffle was. I looked at Leo, who was laughing, his eyes bright and free of the worry that had haunted him 6 months ago. I picked up my glass. Lucas stopped reading and picked up his. Even Leo grabbed his glass of apple juice. I cleared my throat. "To 70 years, I said, smiling. It took me a while to get the celebration right, but I think it was worth the wait. Lucas clinked his glass against mine. "To 70 more, he said. "And to the good guys winning for once." We drank. The champagne was cold and crisp. I looked around the table at my motley crew. A mechanic with a criminal record, a 6-year-old boy with a missing front tooth, and a disgraced manager. It wasn't the family I was born into. It wasn't the family I had raised. But as I looked at them, I realized something profound. Victoria and Gavin shared my blood, but they would have drained it from my veins for $1. Lucas shared nothing with me but a moment of kindness in the rain, yet he had risked his life to save mine. I realized that the old saying was wrong. Blood is not thicker than water. The blood of the covenant is thicker than the water of the womb. The bonds we choose, the bonds we forge through sacrifice and shared struggle, those are the bonds that hold us up when the world tries to tear us down. I reached across the table and ruffled Leo's hair. "So, when are we opening tomorrow, partner?" I asked Lucas. 7 a.m. sharp. Lucas grinned. "We got a lot of cars to fix." I sat back in the leather booth, feeling the ghost of Lillian's hand in mine one last time. She was at peace now. And finally, so was I. If you are listening to this story, let me tell you this. Do not fear the empty chair at your table. Fear the person sitting in it who doesn't respect you. And never ever be afraid to walk out into the rain. Because sometimes that is exactly where you will find the people who will help you weather the storm. My name is Harrison Caldwell. I am 70 years old. I am a father. I am a grandfather. And I am just getting started.